everybody, it's Callie, and today I want to talk about what it meant for me when I got my OCD diagnosis. So I know that going through the whole process of getting your diagnosis can be scary on its own, but from my personal experience, I think the whole thing about having intrusive thoughts and having the obsessions and the compulsions and everything else that goes along with OCD and not knowing that it was OCD was the scariest part for me. I think thinking that I was going crazy or losing touch with reality was definitely the worst part. And I started to feel better once I knew what I was dealing with. And that's why getting that diagnosis was so important for me. And I've talked a little bit before about the whole process of getting my diagnosis and how that went. So I had seen a couple of doctors, and finally one of which I suggested to them through all my compulsive research that I thought maybe what I was dealing with was OCD. And he pretty much agreed and said that that's really what he was thinking as well, and set it up so that I would go to a talk therapist, which, you know, hindsight is 2020, really wasn't the thing that I needed, really wasn't something that was going to help me, but at that point, I didn't really know enough. I didn't know any better. So I just went along with that, and again, you know, spoiler alert, didn't really help. So I was doing that for some time, for quite a while. I was seeing this talk therapist, and I wasn't really seeing, as I said, I wasn't seeing those results that I had hoped for. I wasn't really feeling any better. It was nice, I guess, in terms of maybe I was depressed and I had somebody to talk to. That part was nice, but I wasn't seeing the relief from the obsessions and the compulsions, and the intrusive thoughts were still really, really bothering me. So I started really looking into what the treatment should be ideally when you have OCD, and that's how I stumbled upon ERP, or exposure and response prevention. So again, as I was seeing this talk therapist, I started looking for specialists who could help me through the process of ERP. So I called a bunch of people, I tried to make appointments, and finally I was like over the moon excited when one of them got back to me and said, yes, I do ERP, and yes, I'm taking new patients. So I was so excited because I was like, okay, this is the first step. This is really like when I'm gonna start feeling better. I've also said that once I started telling them about the intrusive thoughts that I was having, I didn't spare any of the gory details about what was going on in my mind. And I know I've said before too that I fully expected them to call the cops. I expected them to say, listen, we can't help you. You need some other kind of doctor because you have some other kind of stuff going on that we just like absolutely cannot work with. But of course, they just very politely nodded and took notes and asked follow-up questions. I said, okay, that makes sense. And, at the end of it, I was just like crying, and I was just totally exhausted from the whole experience, and having had been so open and kind of candid and truthful about what I was, feeling and going through, and saying some things that were really hard actually to say out loud and really hard to kind of put into words. Yeah, the whole experience was extremely exhausting. It just took so much out of me. And by the end, I expected basically for the ambulance to pull up. I've talked about it before, and I'll just never forget them after everything was all said and done. They said, okay, so it sounds like it's really a very textbook case of OCD. And at that point, I don't even know exactly what I was thinking at that moment. On the one hand, I was so relieved that this person whose specialty is OCD, has seen it all before, has had a lot of experience with this thing before, is saying pretty much without a doubt that this is what I'm experiencing. But on the other hand, my obsessions and the intrusive thoughts almost immediately shifted towards, well, what if it's not OCD? What if you were lying? What if you were putting on an act? What if you weren't really as truthful as you should have been? What if you spun the story to make yourself look better? What if you didn't tell them the truth? What if they're wrong? What if they're a fraud? What if all these things? So it kind of shifted, and that became the obsession for a little while. which later I found out that that's actually a really common reaction to finding out that you have OCD or finding out that you're getting a diagnosis. I guess that your mind doubts everything else, so why would this be any different? And I know again that that was definitely the experience for me. And in truth, I still have that thought every once in a while. It makes its rounds just like any of the other thoughts that I sometimes get stuck on. But I can definitely approach it much easier than I used to be able to. I can just say, yeah, maybe I don't have OCD. Maybe I should be committed. Maybe I should be institutionalized. Maybe I'm really dangerous. And I can almost look at it, not so much mocking, that maybe that's not the right word, but I can look at it with a little bit of humor, where way back in the beginning, nothing was funny. Nothing about what I was going through was funny. And now I kind of have that, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit cynical, but now I can kind of look at a lot of the situations that I find myself in with my OCD with a little bit of humor, with a little bit of dark humor. And I find that that helps. And I kind of see that as a marker that I've gotten a lot better, because everything was so unfunny when it was first happening. When it was really bad, I couldn't make any kind of joke. I couldn't really fathom anything about this being a little bit lighthearted. But I've lived with it for so long and I've come so far in my treatment that now I can look back on these things and see, wow, I was like really hung up on this. I can kind of make a joke. And of course, I don't want to make a joke for anybody that is really struggling, because I've been there and I know what it's like, and I know how intense a lot of these feelings can be. And I know how low it can feel to really feel like you have no way out, to start to feel like there's no way I can get better. There's nothing that I can do. So what's the point of it all? You know, you start to really have those really dark existential feelings sometimes. And of course, I don't ever want to make light of that. And I just want to say that my heart really goes out to anybody that is experiencing that, or has experienced it, or is trying to help somebody that's kind of going through it, because man, that's the pits. That's the worst. And you definitely want to talk to somebody if that's something that you're going through, because it is really serious. Anyway, I digress. The point is, we want to make sure that we are getting all of the help that we need. But regardless of the whirlwind of thoughts and feelings that I was having, there was one thing for sure, and that's I had some kind of actionable thing to work on now. I'd gotten a diagnosis for something that there was a treatment for. I had a diagnosis for something that I could put some kind of plan together to start to feel better and to start to work on getting back to how I felt before, getting back to kind of just feeling normal. So I had something to do to have that happen. I had done a lot of research at that point into what ERP was, and I knew that it was a commitment. I knew that it was a process, and it unfortunately wasn't as simple as, you know, something like an infection where you take an antibiotic and you kind of start to feel better the next day or in a couple of hours. I knew that it was something that I was going to have to work on. But there was hope. There was knowing that through other people's experiences that I was reading online, it seemed like other people had felt the way that I was feeling, had felt really low, had felt that they just couldn't get better, had felt that their lives really weren't worth living, and they had gotten better. They had felt like their normal selves again, maybe how they felt before their OCD. And that was something that was so important to me and so inspiring. And yeah, at a lot of times my OCD kind of crept in and said, yeah, but you're different, you're a special case, they weren't as bad as you, you're too sick, you're too far gone, there's something else wrong with you. But I still worked through that. And that was something that I didn't really let it hold me back. I kept going. And there were times that I really thought that it wasn't going to get better, but knowing that at some point in all of those people's journeys, all of those people who were sharing their experiences, they also felt that way and still got better, and still felt that they were living their lives the way that they wanted to despite their OCD, was really inspiring. And that really kind of kept me going and seeing that, yeah, they also felt this way, but they got better. So for me, getting that diagnosis and knowing that with the right kind of guidance, I could get better, Knowing that kind of planted these little tiny seeds of hope, where all along all my OCD had been doing was planting seeds of doubt. So I had to learn, instead of nourishing those seeds of doubt like I was used to by having the obsessions and ruminating about them, or, you know, having the obsessions and then doing some other kind of compulsion. That was what was nourishing that doubt. I had to then learn instead to nourish that hope and know that one day I would start to feel better. And again, we know that unfortunately OCD isn't one of those things that you just snap your fingers and immediately start to feel better. It's something that kind of, as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, gradually you'll start to notice one day you look back and you say, wait a minute, I don't feel as bad as I used to. I feel better. And when did that happen? And you start to see these little tiny changes that all gradually add up to something really big, and something that you're saying, wait a minute, I feel better. This is how I want to feel. This is good. I'm at the point that I need to be. I mentioned before that having the right kind of guidance is really what makes this process go the way that it's supposed to, and that is where NOCD comes in. Through NOCD, you can talk to a specialist that can help guide you through that whole process of ERP and also any of the other facets of living with OCD. The sooner you start, the sooner you can look back and see how far you've come from all those gradual changes that I was talking about. If this sounds like something that you're ready to do, you can go to NOCD.com or treatmyocd.com today to start. Like I said, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll start to see those positive changes. And on that note, I'm gonna get going, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.